All right. Ever heard of an empire that was like a mashup of fierce Mongol warriors and like super refined Persian art and literature?
Sounds kind of epic.
It is. It's the Ilkhanate Empire, and it's a pretty fascinating chapter of history. It definitely changes how you think about the Mongol conquests, not just about brute force. You sent us this document about the Ilkhanate, right?
Yeah, it's a great overview.
Perfect. It's a great launching point for today's deep dives. We're going to explore the whole rise and fall of this Mongol powerhouse, unpack how they ruled such a diverse population, and uncover why this story still matters, even today.
Yeah, the Ilkhanate, they were more than just conquerors. It's a story of cultural exchange, adapting to new situations, and honestly a reminder that even empires built on, taking over others can leave a mark that goes way beyond battles and war.
Okay, so picture this. It's the 13th century, and the Mongol Empire is this unstoppable force. They're everywhere, from East Asia to Eastern Europe.
Huge, yeah.
Right. And inside this massive empire, there were these like subdivisions, almost like mini empires within the big one.
Right. Yeah.
And one of these was led by Hulegu, a grandson of Genghis Khan himself.
Talk about a legacy, right? And Hulegu, he wasn't just some random relative. He was given a super important mission by his brother, Monkey Khan, who was the great Khan of the entire Mongol Empire at the time.
So Monkey was basically like, go west, young man.
Pretty much. He basically told Hulegu to expand their territory westward, focusing on conquering Persia.
Okay, but Persia, that wasn't just about grabbing some extra land, was it? It was super strategic, right?
Oh, totally. Persia was key for a bunch of reasons. First, it was smack dab in the middle of the Silk Road trade routes.
Ah, so whoever controlled Persia, they controlled the flow of goods and all that wealth.
Exactly. Plus, conquering Persia meant taking out potential rivals and just solidifying the Mongol Empire's control over a huge chunk of Eurasia. Like, they weren't messing around.
Smart move. So how did Hulegu's campaign go? Were the Persians just totally crushed by the Mongol war machine?
Well, yeah, the Mongols were known for being incredibly powerful, especially their cavalry.
Right, those fierce horsemen.
But here's the thing. They didn't just charge in blindly. They were incredibly strategic. Like, they would do these things called feigned retreat.
Feigned retreats, what's that?
So basically, they'd pretend to run away, making the enemy think they were winning, and then bam! They'd turn around and attack when the enemy was all disorganized.
Oh wow, sneaky.
And they were masters of flanking maneuvers too, surrounding the enemy. Plus, they could adapt to any terrain, any enemy.
So they were like the special forces of their time, more than just brute force.
Exactly. And don't forget about their psychological warfare. They were masters at that too.
Psychological warfare, what, like mind games?
Yeah, kinda. They'd send these envoys to cities before attacking. The envoys would basically say, look, surrender now and you'll be spared. Resist and things will get really ugly.
Like a join us or die kind of message.
Basically, and you know what? It often worked. Cities surrendered without a fight, which saved the Mongols resources and manpower.
I guess nobody wants to mess with Genghis Khan's grandson.
Right. And this mix of intimidation and practicality, it really worked for them. Like in 1256, Hulegu's forces, they captured this place called Alamut.
Alamut, that rings a bell.
It was the stronghold of the assassins, like these super secretive, super feared warriors.
Ah, okay, so that must have been a big symbolic win for the Ilkhanate.
Absolutely. It showed everyone just how powerful they were and really solidified Hulegu's control over Persia.
So they're outsmarting their enemies using psychological tactics, but still they had that reputation for brutality, right?
Well, yeah, the Mongol conquests, they were often pretty harsh. But we have to remember that warfare back then, in the 13th century, it was just a whole different game.
True. It's not like they were signing peace treaties and having UN summits back then.
Exactly. And when a city resisted, the Mongols could be ruthless. They wanted to make an example to discourage any future rebellions. But it's worth noting that they often spared the cities that surrendered peacefully. Those cities, they became part of their expanding empire.
Like, be smart, join us, and things will be okay.
Pretty much. It was this mix of ruthlessness and, honestly, pragmatism. And you can really see that mix when we look at what happened in Baghdad in 1258.
Baghdad, right. That was a huge turning point. I mean, it wasn't just another city they conquered, was it?
Nope. Baghdad, at that time, it was the heart of the Islamic world. It was the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, which was a dynasty that had ruled a vast empire for centuries.
Wow, so Baghdad was a big deal.
Oh, huge. A center of learning, culture, trade, famous for its libraries, mosques, palaces, like think ancient Rome levels of importance.
I can only imagine what the fall of Baghdad must meant for the Islamic world.
It was a shock, for sure. The Abbasid Caliphate had been declining for a while, but their capture by the Mongols, that marked the end of their rule. And for a lot of people in the Islamic world, it felt like a catastrophe, like the end of an era.
Wow, okay, so let's recap.
Eh.
The Mongols control Persia, Baghdad's fallen, and Hulagu. He's basically the undisputed ruler of this massive new territory. What's next for him? World domination.
Well, Hulagu was ambitious, for sure. The territory he ruled, it became known as the Ilkhanate.
The Ilkhanate, huh?
Yeah, it means subordinate Khanate in Mongolian, basically acknowledging their link to the Great Khan back in Mongolia.
Okay, so like a branch of the main family business.
Yeah, something like that. But in reality, the Ilkhanate, they were pretty much running their own show. They were autonomous.
Interesting. So even though they were technically part of this bigger Mongol empire, they were making their own decisions.
Exactly. And Hulagu, he wasn't the type to just sit around, admiring his conquests. He wanted more. He had his eyes on Syria and Egypt specifically.
Ambitious, huh?
Oh, yeah. And guess who controlled those regions?
Give me a second. Syria, Egypt. It's on the tip of my tongue.
The Mamluks.
The Mamluks, of course.
They were this really powerful military force. They had emerged from, get this, slave soldiers.
Whoa, from slaves to rulers. That's quite a story.
Right. So you have these two powerful forces, the Ilkhanate, led by Genghis Khan's grandson, and the Mamluks, these, warrior elite.
This is setting up to be an epic showdown.
It totally was. Their first big clash was in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut. That's in present-day Israel. And get this battle was huge because it was the first major defeat of a Mongol army in open battle since Genghis Khan started conquering everything.
Wait, seriously? The Mongols? They lost, but they were, unstoppable. How did that happen?
Well, a few things. First, the Mamluks, they were incredible warriors themselves, and they knew that terrain like the back of their hand.
Home field advantage.
Right. And the Ilkhanate army was actually smaller than usual. Hulagu, he had gone back to Mongolia because Munka Khan had died. So his general, Kibuka, was in charge.
So maybe a bit of bad timing for the Ilkhanate.
Yeah, and the Mamluks, they just fought really well.
So that sounds like a mix of good strategy, knowing the land, and maybe a little luck for the Mamluks.
Definitely. And their victory, it wasn't just about military tactics. It had a huge impact on morale. It showed people that the Mongols, they weren't invincible, gave hope to those who were under Mongol rule, hey, they can be beaten.
Makes sense. A big morale booster for the resistance. So did this battle, the Battle of Ain Jalut, did it stop the Ilkhanate's expansion completely?
It kind of put a stop to their westward expansion. The Mamluks, they basically drew a line in the sand, but the Ilkhanate, they were still a major force in the region.
So clocked in the west. What about, going east, back towards the heart of the Mongol Empire?
They had some skirmishes with other Mongol Khanates, like the Golden Horde up north and the Chagatai Khanate to the east. But honestly, the Ilkhanate, they were more focused on controlling Persia and the areas around it.
Consolidating their power.
Exactly. And, that brings us to one of the most interesting parts of the Ilkhanate story, how they blended with Persian culture.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. They weren't just conquerors, right? They really adopted a lot of Persian culture. How did that happen?
Well, remember, the Mongols, they were pragmatic rulers. They knew that to rule effectively, they had to adapt.
So it wasn't about just forcing everyone to become Mongols.
No, not at all. In fact, they were pretty open to taking on elements of other cultures. And Persia, with its long history, its organized administration, and its art and intellectual scene, it had a big impact on the Ilkhanate.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about how this blending happened.
Well, think about it this way. The Ilkhanate, they made Persian the official language of their administration.
Wow, so not Mongolian.
Nope. It shows they understood how important it was to communicate with the local population, to integrate,
Smart move, yeah. Makes governing a lot easier.
Totally. And it went beyond language. The Ilkhanate rulers, they started adopting Persian customs, like how they dressed, even art styles. They were patrons of Persian artists, poets, scholars. It led to a flourishing of Persian culture within the Ilkhanate court.
But basically, the Mongol rulers were hanging out with Persian artists and poets.
Yeah.
That's not what I pictured. It's like the tough guys suddenly appreciating calligraphy and poetry readings.
Yeah, it's a cool twist, right? And the exchange went both ways. The Mongols, they brought their own traditions and influences too.
Like what?
Well, they introduced new metalworking and textile techniques, which changed Persian craftsmanship. Plus, their nomadic traditions, all about horsemanship and archery, they became a part of Persian court life.
So they influenced each other. That's awesome.
It really is. And this blend, It wasn't just for the elites either. It spread throughout society, from architecture to music to food.
A true cultural fusion. I can see why this period, the Ilkhanate, is so important to Persian history.
It really is. Their story shows how complex empire building is, how cultures mix and change. It definitely makes you think twice about the Mongols.
Yeah. It's not just black and white, conquerors versus conquered. It's way
Yes.
more nuanced than that.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're blending with Persian culture, but what about religion? I mean, the Mongols originally followed a bunch of different faiths, right?
Yeah, they did. Buddhism, shamanism, even some Christianity in the mix.
Wow, a real mix. So when they take over Persia, a predominantly Muslim region, what happens?
That's where things get even more interesting. And that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
Ah, you're going to leave us hanging.
Just gotta keep you coming back for more. But
Hmm.
I can tell you the Ilkhanites' relationship with Islam, it becomes a defining part of their rule.
Okay, now I really can't wait for part 2. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Ilkhanate Empire. Last time we left off with this huge question mark. What's going to happen with Islam in this Mongol-ruled Persia?
Yeah, remember the early Ilkhanate rulers, they were all over the place, religion-wise, but most of the people they were ruling in Persia, they were Muslim.
Right, right. And as the Ilkhanate shifted from like conquering to actually governing that religious difference, it must become a big deal.
Huge deal. It wasn't just about, freedom of religion or whatever. It was about power, about looking legit to the people you're ruling.
Yeah, if you want the people to accept you as their leader, it helps to have their spiritual support, right?
Exactly. And for the Ilkhanate, long-term embracing Islam, that could be a really smart move to solidify their power.
So, did they make everyone convert to Islam? I thought you said they were all about tolerance before.
No, no, it wasn't like that. It was more gradual, and it started at the top with the rulers themselves. In 1295, Ghazan, a descendant of Hulagu, he converted to Islam, specifically Sunni Islam.
Wow, okay. The ruler converting to the religion of the people he rules. That's a pretty big statement. What happened after that?
Well, it changed things a lot. For one, it sent a message to the Muslims in Persia, like, hey, our ruler is one of us now.
Right, like a show of solidarity.
Exactly. It helped legitimize Ghazan's rule, got him more support from everyday people.
Okay, so politically, a smart move. But was it genuine? Or was it just a power play?
Well, it's hard to say for sure what was going on in Ghazan's head.
Yeah.
But the historical accounts, they say he was a sincere convert. He even took the Islamic name Mahmud, and he actually put Islamic laws and principles into place.
So he was walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And his conversion, it had a ripple effect. More people started converting to Islam. And you see Islamic culture and law becoming more integrated into the whole empire.
It's interesting how, like, one person's conversion can have such a big impact on a whole society.
Right. And speaking of conversions, there's another one. Remember how Ghazan was Sunni Muslim?
Yeah.
Well, in 1310, Uljeitu, Ghazan's successor, he converted to Shiite Islam.
Hold on, wait. Sunni, Shiite? What's the difference again? I always get those mixed up.
It's a long story, but basically, after the Prophet Muhammad died, there was a disagreement about who should lead the Muslim community.
Okay, so like a succession crisis.
Yeah, kinda. The Sunnis, they believe the community should choose the leader. But the Shiites, they believe leadership should have gone directly to Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law.
Okay, got it. So Uljeitu converting to Shiism, how did that go over in the Ilkhanate?
Well, he didn't force anyone to convert or anything, but it definitely created some tension, some division.
Makes sense. The majority of the people were Sunni, right?
Yeah, and so having a Shiite ruler, it made some of them nervous.
So all these different factions, different beliefs, it must have been a real challenge to keep things together.
Oh, totally. But what's interesting? Despite all this, the Ilkhanate was having a cultural golden age at the same time.
Wait, really? During all this religious tension?
Yeah. We talked before about them adopting Persian culture, but under Ghazan and Uljeitu, it just exploded.
Like a cultural renaissance.
Exactly. Both those rulers, they loved the arts and sciences. They built mosques, libraries, even observatories. And they supported all these scholars, poets, artists.
So not just conquerors and politicians, but patrons of the arts too. That's cool.
Yeah, it really added to their legacy. And during this time, you see this amazing fusion of Persian and Mongol traditions, leading to some really unique art, architecture, literature.
Okay, I have to ask, what are some like specific examples of that fusion? Give me the highlights.
All right, well, one big example is the work of Rashid al-Din Hamadani. He was a super smart scholar, historian, advisor to both Ghazan and Alger.
Important guy then.
Oh, yeah. He was commissioned to write a history of the world.
Whoa,
Yeah,
history of a whole world.
the whole thing. And the result was this book called Jami al-Tarawik, which is considered one of the most important historical works from the Islamic world.
What makes it so special? Just the scope of it.
Well, yeah, it's incredibly detailed, covers everything from the Mongols to China to India to Europe. But also, it's written from this unique perspective. Rashid al-Din, he was at the crossroads of Persian and Mongol cultures.
So he had a different view of history.
Exactly. It's not just dates and names. It's a new way of looking at history through this lens of cultural exchange.
That's fascinating. So they're making advances in history. What else?
Oh, and don't forget the art. This period also saw this really distinctive style of Persian miniature painting emerge.
Miniature painting. What's that like?
Think small, detailed paintings, often done on books or manuscripts. And this Ilkhanate style, it was influenced by Mongol and Chinese art too.
A real melting pot of artistic ideas. Sounds like this was a golden age for the Ilkhanate.
In a lot of ways, it was. But even golden ages, they don't last forever, right?
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, in part 3 of our deep dive, we'll get into some of the big challenges the Ilkhanate faced. Challenges that, well, eventually led to their collapse.
Oh, okay. Another cliffhanger. But I gotta know, what kind of challenges are we talking about?
Think internal power struggles, external threats, and something that changed the world forever, the Black Death.
The plague.
Oh.
Okay, now I really have to hear what happens next. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on this wild ride exploring the Ilkhanate Empire. It's crazy how they went from conquering Persia to, like, totally embracing Persian culture and Islam.
Right. They really challenge how we think about the Mongols.
For sure. But at the end of part 2, things were getting kind of shaky for them, right?
Yeah, definitely. They had all these achievements, but there were cracks starting to show, things that eventually led to their downfall. And it wasn't just like losing battle.
What else was going on?
Lots of internal drama, problems with who was going to rule next. And I mean, keeping a giant empire like that together, that's always a struggle.
Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen can spoil the whole empire, right? So let's talk about those internal tensions. We mentioned the whole Sunni versus Shia Muslim thing before,
Right.
but was there more?
Oh, yeah, tons more. A big one was, well, succession. Like, who's going to be the next ruler? Remember, Hulagu, Genghis Khan's grandson, he started it all.
Right.
But as time went on, the line of succession got less clear.
So you have all these different people, different families, all wanting the throne.
Exactly. And those power struggles, they cause so much instability, even fighting within the ruling class.
I mean, that makes sense. If you're constantly worried about someone trying to take your power, you're not going to be focused on, like, running the empire well, right?
Totally. It's like a family fighting over who gets the TV remote while the house is on fire.
And speaking of fires, the Ilkhanate, they had plenty of those externally, too. They were still clashing with the Mamluks in the west and had tension with other Mongol Khanates in the north and east.
So they're getting it from all sides. Yep. And then you add economic problems on top of that. Their empire, it relied heavily on trade, especially that Silk Road we talked about.
Right, the Silk Road was like their economic lifeline.
Exactly. But all the instability, the wars disrupting trade routes, it hit their economy hard.
It's like a domino effect, right?
Yeah.
One problem leads to another, and then it all starts to crumble.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, something happens that changes the game completely. Not just for the Ilkhanate, but for the whole world. The Black Death.
Oh, man, the plague.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't just a European thing, was it?
Nope. In the mid-14th century, this pandemic, it started in Central Asia, most likely, and swept across Eurasia, killing millions. And the Ilkhanate, they were already weak, from all the problems we talked about.
Can't imagine how scary that must have been, facing a pandemic like that.
It was devastating. People dying left and right, cities abandoned, trade stopped. And for the Ilkhanate, honestly, it was the final blow.
So, internal struggles, external threats, a bad economy, and then the Black Death just wipes them out.
Pretty much. By the 1340s, the Ilkhanate, it had broken apart into all these little pieces, each ruled by local leaders. Their empire gone.
That's kind of sad, a story that started with so much promise, ending like that. But even though the Ilkhanate disappeared, they left a mark, right?
Oh, for sure. They didn't last that long, but their influence, especially in Persia, is still felt today. The way they blended with Persian culture, adopted Islam, supported the arts and sciences, That stuff stuck around.
Okay, so what are some specific examples? Like, what can we still see today because of the Ilkhanate?
Well, look at their architecture. All those mosques, palaces, other buildings, a lot of them are still standing today. And they've got this unique look, a mix of Persian and Mongol
I
styles.
love that style. All the intricate tile work, the arches, the patterns and flowers. It's so beautiful.
It is. And it wasn't just about looking pretty, they really cared about infrastructure too. They built roads, bridges, irrigation systems, all of that helped the economy grow.
They weren't afraid to build things up, not just tear them down.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's their influence on art and literature. They brought Persian and Mongol traditions together in such creative ways. We already talked about Rashid al-Din and his mega history book, but there were tons of other artists and writers who flourished under the Ilkhanate.
They really encouraged a whole cultural boom.
They did. And that open-mindedness, their willingness to embrace different cultures, that's maybe their most important legacy. They showed you could build an empire with military might, sure, but also through cultural exchange.
Yeah, it's not just about winning battles, it's about winning hearts and minds, too.
Exactly. But of course, their story also shows how hard it is to build an empire, how tough it is to keep a diverse society unified.
Right, empires, they're not invincible, even ones as powerful as the Ilkhanate.
Exactly. Leadership, unity, knowing how to adapt, that's all so important. The Ilkhanate, they teach us a lot about that.
Well, that's it. Our deep dive into the Ilkhanate Empire. It's been a whirlwind, right?
Yeah.
Conquests, culture, ups and downs, the plague.
A real roller coaster ride through history. And it really shows how complex history is. The Mongols, they weren't just these one-dimensional conquerors.
Right. It makes you wonder, what if things had gone differently? What if the Black Death hadn't happened? Could they have survived?
Yeah, what if they had stayed united? Those are questions we'll never know the answers to, but it's fun to think about, right?
That's what I love about history. It's
Mm.
not just memorizing dates and names. It's about, imagining different paths, exploring all these what ifs.
Totally. The Ilkhanate, they remind us that history is full of ambition, cultural clashes, and yeah, even the biggest empires can fall.
So that wraps up our deep dive on the Ilkhanate Empire. Hope you enjoyed it. But we want to hear what you think. What surprised you the most about them? What lessons did you take away from their story? Let us know. We're always ready for another deep dive.